Hi everyone, and thank you very much for joining this morning. If I just share my screen. Okay, so can you all see my screen? Yeah, cool. So yeah, Jax gave me a really nice intro there. So yeah, I'm currently studying at Trinity College, Dublin. So I'm looking into sharks and other big fish in Irish waters. But today I'm going to be talking to you about where do sharks go and how do we know. Now, one of the biggest draws to studying sharks is their mysterious nature. So this is a slide for everyone old enough to remember this music video. But in terms of sharks and the shark world, they don't come kind of more mysterious than sort of the frilled shark or the goblin shark or the megamouth shark. Now, these sharks might be a little more unfamiliar to us than what we're used to seeing when people say the word shark. But even the sharks that we're more familiar with, such as the basking shark, a few people don't know, for example, that they can jump completely out of the water, and they do so at such speeds which are similar to great whites. So that's an incredible kind of feat for a shark that size. And again, even some of the better studied sharks like tiger sharks, well, it was discovered recently by my PhD supervisor, Dr. Nicholas Payne, that they have this Goldilocks preferred temperature of about 22 degrees. And you'll actually be hearing loads more about that later on in the month from my colleague, Lucy Harding. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. So all these bits of information that we're learning about sharks inspire more and more people to come into shark research. And one big area of shark research is looking at where sharks are going and why they might be moving around or why they might be staying more local. Now, sharks are well known for being superbly adapted predators, but they're also greatly adapted to moving around in the water. So, for example, they've got their pectoral fin here, so these provide lift in the water, and they've got a really light skeleton that's made out of cartilage. And their skin is covered in tiny, tiny teeth called denticles, and they reduce drag as the sharks are going through the water. Now, they're so efficient at reducing this drag, designers and engineers are looking at shark skin in order to improve their designs. So, for example, engineers from sort of aeroplane developers or drones, or even the people that make sort of wind turbines, are now looking towards this natural shark technology to improve their own products. And because of these adaptations, sharks can make incredible movements and migrations. So as Jack said, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about my research, which was on basking sharks. But just to hit a few fan favourites at home, I'm going to run through some shark migration stories. So the whale shark is the largest fish and the largest shark in our seas. They can grow up to 18 meters long, which is an incredible size. And one whale shark was shown to travel 12,516 miles. So you might be wondering what that actually looks like. And this is a map from the research. And the whale shark was tagged around about here near the Galapagos and made this incredible journey over the Pacific and ended up between Japan and the Philippines. Now, if we move on to the blue shark, now this is arguably known as one of the best sort of movers and shakers within the shark world and makes this incredible migration every year. So it migrates around about 5,700 miles and does so in this clockwise pattern, where the sharks are doing different things at different stages in this migration. So they might be mating, or they might be feeding, or they might even be pupping or giving birth. And I'm going to try and keep it a bit cormal related as well. So when some sharks arrive here, they're mostly made up of females, as they're actively trying to avoid males. And another favourite, which is the great white shark. So this is arguably one of the better studied species in the shark world. And their migration could form a whole other presentation. So I've just picked up on a story that I thought was quite interesting. So this is a map from a research paper, but all it's showing are these little dots is a location from a great white shark. And this is the coast of California and the coast of Mexico. And researchers found that from every April to July, sharks basically come out to this area here, and they've called it the Great White Cafe. So the sharks are going there to feed. So I'm sure we're all a bit jealous of those great whites at the minute, as they can go out to their favourite kind of cafe or restaurant and grab something to eat. But how do we know where they're going? So there's a whole host of methods that we can use to try and work out where sharks are going and why they might be going there. So I'm just going to talk about a few here, but there are other ways we can tell as well. So one way we can tell where they're going is through photo identification. So where we take pictures of the sharks to try and work out who's who. So this is a picture of a basking shark dorsal fin. So that's the fin on the back of the shark. And along this edge here, you can see that there's loads of little nicks and cuts. And we can use those to actually identify individual basking sharks. Now we can also tell where they're going through bycatch. So sometimes sharks are accidentally caught by fishers. And although this is really unfortunate, we can also use that data to look at where sharks are going. We can also put in Floy tags or spaghetti tags. So they're called spaghetti because sometimes they do look a bit like spaghetti hanging out of the fish. But on each of these Floy tags is a unique identifying number. So if ever that fish is caught again, we can say, well, this fish was tagged in Cornwall and now it's ended up in France, or it might be re-caught in Cornwall. So again, that's telling us more information about their movements. We could also use something called a pit tag, which is a little device that's inserted under the skin. And that's very similar to the microchips that you might have in your pet. So again, a scanner is run over the fish, and then a unique number will pop up telling us who that fish is. Now, unfortunately, marine life has a habit of disappearing under the sea, and you can't always see what's in the sea. So we need a way to try and track them under the water. And that's where things called satellite tags come into play. So there are two main types. We have pop-up satellite archival tags, or they're called PSAT for short, and these are these tags here. And what they do is create a location estimate based on depth data, temperature data, and light data. Now these tags produce a location estimate of around 60 to 180 kilometers. So somewhere within that area, the animal can be found. Now, just to put that into perspective, again, sorry, this is a Cornish example, but 60 kilometres is about the distance from Penzance to Truro, and 180 is about the distance from Penzance to Exeter. So just to give you an idea of how big that area could be. But these tags are great when we're looking at long-range migration, because obviously the ocean is a massive place, so those errors don't actually have that much effect when we're looking at long-range migration. But if we wanted to look at where sharks are moving along the coast and get a more accurate location, then we use something called smart position or temperature transmitting spot tags. So that's this tag down here. I know some of you might recognize this beach as well. So these tags work by communicating with overhead satellites. So these tags need to go on species that stay close to the surface. So this antenna can pop through the water and talk to satellites. And these tags are great at getting high resolution data. So that means that we can track the sharks along the coast as they can produce an accuracy measurement of around 250 meters, which, to put that into perspective, is about 2.5 football pitches. So it's a really great way to track sharks. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my master's research, where I looked at Isle of Man basking sharks. So just a brief intro to basking sharks, because Colin Speedy is going to give, I'm sure, a fantastic presentation on them. But they're the second largest fish species. So they can grow up to 12 meters, but we commonly see them around about 6 to 8 meters. So we should all have our 2-meter social distancing down. So after this presentation, try and walk out kind of how big 12 meters actually is, if you can. And they feed on tiny, tiny little animals called zooplankton, and they filter them through their gills, and they have a global distribution. So all these areas in this goldy orange colour are where we can find basking sharks. However, they have been heavily fished in the past, so their population levels are very low, and they're of conservation concern. Now, I'm sure loads of you would have heard about the Isle of Man, because this is where Jax is from. So yeah, I think Jax is from around about down here. But for anyone that doesn't know, it's located between Northern Ireland and England. And they have their own fisheries limit, as indicated by this line, and their own territorial limit. Now, the Isle of Man is also known as a basking shark hotspot, and this picture was actually taken in the Isle of Man waters. So this is what we commonly see. You've got a nose sticking out the top. This is the basking shark's dorsal fin, and this is the tip of the tail. So you often see these 3 points, and this is a really good picture to show what it looks like when basking sharks are feeding. And you can even see the zooplankton bubbling on the surface here as they're kind of popping out the water. Now, I worked with a charity called Manx Basking Shark Watch for a couple of years, working on basking sharks. But when I left the Isle of Man, I went to the University of Exeter to do my master's degree, and that's where my project took off. So I was supervised by Dr. Matthew Witt and Dr. Lucy Hawkes, where we brought together all of this research from Manx Basking Shark Watch. And as part of the research, we attached those spot tags. So because basking sharks come to the surface, we were able to use those tags. And that's the tag just trailing behind the shark there. So when the shark comes to the surface, that tag pops through and can talk to overhead satellites. So this is as sciencey as I'm going to get today, so don't worry, and I'm going to take you through what these maps actually mean.
Haley, so can I just pause? Yeah. Pause you there 1 second. There's somebody, mic isn't muted. I think it's Sonia, but I don't think there's any on the computer. But Sonia, if you can hear me, could you just mute your microphone, please? Thank you.
Cool. So in total, we had 11 of these basking sharks that were tagged. So in science, you'll see this N equals, and all that means is it's just fancy science talk for how many. So in my study, there were 11 sharks. 3 were female and 8 were male. And those spot tags stayed on for a range of 27 to 797 days. So there's a real range on sort of how long the tags stayed on for. Now, as this talk is about migration, I've included a couple of maps from my study which show the more far-ranging movements. So in these maps, each of these circles just represents a location data point, and each different colour is a different shark. Now the lines connecting the dots are just that, they're just connecting them, so they aren't the actual movements of the shark. So no matter how great I think basking sharks are, they haven't evolved the ability to walk through land, or yet. They might, who knows. And yeah, so my study took place within the Irish Sea, which is this light grey polygon here. So if we talk about this map first, so this individual in yellow was tagged in Isle of Man waters, went to the Bay of Biscay, went to the coast of Portugal, down to Morocco, up to Ireland, and then back down to Portugal and Morocco. So making some incredible movements. And it was tracked for 797 days, which is 2 years and 2 months. Now that's the longest time a satellite tag has stayed on basking sharks, so that was super cool. And it's also the first time we've recorded a basking shark coming back to Moroccan waters every year. We also had this individual in green, which again was tagged in Isle of Man waters, went off to the Faroe Islands, came down to the Bay of Biscay, and was actually tracked to Norwegian waters. And again, that's the first time we've managed to track basking sharks to Norwegian waters. So we've had some really great results from this data. And we also had these 4 individual sharks here, which made seasonal northward migrations to another hotspot in the Inner Hebrides in Scotland. So this is just demonstrating how connected different populations of basking sharks are. And they also spent a considerable amount of time within this blue polygon here, which I think has just been designated as a marine nature reserve. And part of that was thanks to the hard work from researchers at the University of Exeter. So these 2 maps just show a couple of results from my study, and I was lucky that they had some incredible results. But to sort of summarize the whole of my project, I made this infographic. So all this is doing is breaking down everything I found in my paper, but making it hopefully easy to understand by using pictures. So if I just talk you through it now. So as I mentioned earlier, we had that first satellite track to Norway and the first record of site fidelity to Morocco. So site fidelity just means that the shark came back the next year. And we had that record tag duration of 2 years and 2 months. So as well as that case of site fidelity to Morocco, we also had 4 sharks that came back to the Irish Sea. So why is that important? Well, perhaps they're making those migrations to go and mate, or perhaps the area is important for a nursery area for baby basking sharks, or perhaps it's a good area to feed, or maybe they're even just going home, so back to where they were born. So as I mentioned earlier, those spot tags can give us location estimates at a higher accuracy. So that means that we were able to look at where basking sharks go around the Isle of Man. So this is the Isle of Man here. And in these hotspot areas here, the redder the area, the more basking shark data was found in that area. So from the satellite data, we picked up this West Coast hotspot. And Manx Basking Shark Watch also gave us their public sightings data, which picked up, again, this hotspot here, and also extended it south of the island. And we also had these marine nature reserves, and we wanted to see how well they'd perform in terms of protecting the basking shark. And we found that if this marine nature reserve, which has been designated to protect different species and habitats, if it was extended across this line here, then it could encompass an additional 20% of data. Now, although that is an incredible amount when we're looking at conservation, the Isle of Man is a really proud fishing nation, and they're famous for their scallops. And I think this area is actually really important for scallop fisheries. So that just hints at some of the politics that goes on behind the scenes when we're looking into conservation. But the fishing industry wants the marine life to be healthy there, as do conservationists. But as has been shown recently, I think very clearly, like, people need to make a living and we need to have food to eat. So when these animals are making these migrations, and this covers many other species, they face these hurdles to migration. So they might actually be struck by vessels, and vessels create a lot of noise. They might be accidentally caught in fisheries. And in fact, during my study, one of the basking sharks was caught in fisheries, but I was told it was released alive and swam away. Sharks have the ability to detect electrical sensors, and there are more and more electrical cables going into the sea, which might affect their behaviour. And also development of things like wind farms, which although do create sort of an area to feed in, they can produce not only a physical barrier, but also a noise barrier to migration. So this infographic just shows sort of how much information we were able to pick out from using these tags and the potential implications to their conservation. So this is something I'm hoping to explore in my PhD. Hang on a sec. Where I'll be studying six-gill sharks in Irish waters. So six-gill sharks are a deep sea species, typically found at around 800 meters, but around the Irish coast, they're found at around 80 meters. So we're going to attach those PSATs to look at where they're going and if they stick around in Irish waters or if they make these incredible migrations. And I'm also going to be looking at Atlantic bluefin tuna and using other technology to record their internal temperature, oxygen levels, and I'm going to use other technology such as cameras. So I'm going to deploy those on both the tuna and the shark. And hopefully we'll get images like this, although not this because this is a penguin head and its prey is here. And basically researchers have been using these cameras to verify what these animals get up to when we can't see them. So why are we doing all of this? Why are we deploying this technology on these animals and like blinging them up? So basically, as Bruce says, fish are friends and not food. So we're collecting all this data to look at where these animals are going and what they're doing, because without knowing that, it makes it really hard to try and conserve these animals. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. I think we've got time for questions now, don't we?
Yeah, we do. So if you, Haley, if you stop sharing your screen, and I should be able to see everybody's faces. So if you want to, you can post a question in the chat, or if you put your hand up, then I should be able to see everybody.
I don't know how to get back to the
what to unshare. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to click on share screen and stop sharing.
I don't have an option.
We had this one, yes, the other day.
I did.
As I say, guys, sorry, we're trying to learn how to do this. So yeah, you did it by magic the other day. I'm not sure.
I don't know how I did it.
Sharky magic. I don't know. Okay, I'm looking for. I can't see any hands up.
Oh, hang on. No, I don't want new share.
Okay.
How about if I'm gonna make you the host?
I mean, sure.
And then my screen should stop, right?
We'll see. I don't think so, but it's fine. I'm the host, but I can still see your screen.
Okay, make me the host.
Don't worry, it's fine. So you can, guys who don't have Haley's screen, you can. Oh, there we go. Somehow magic. Who knows how it happened? Okay, so I have a question from Carol. Why are female sharks trying to avoid male sharks by coming to Cornwall?
So yeah, good question. So we think that the female sharks are trying to avoid the males. So basically, once blue sharks have mated, the females can actually store the sperm for, I think, over a year. So the females are basically trying to avoid all the aggression that they might receive from males that want to mate. So that's why we think that they're avoiding them.
Cool, thank you. We've actually got, so sometimes Zoom lets you upgrade after 40 minutes, but it hasn't said that it's going to do that. So we might only have 3.5 minutes left. Susan, you've had your hand up. I'm going to unmute you and then you can say your question. There you go.
Actual question marks. How do the sharks mate?
Oh, that's a really good question. And one that we don't, for some species, that we don't even know the answer to. So, for example, the basking shark, we're still not sure how they mate. But generally what happens is that males will bite onto the pectoral fin of a female, So that's actually one good way to tell the difference if you've got any shark teeth that you have. Males have a curved shark tooth, whereas females are more straight, and that's because they have to use that to bite on. And then basically they kind of twist together, and male basking sharks have things called claspers, which are their reproductive organ, and then that's how they mate, so they're kind of intertwined and bitey.
Does that answer your question?
That's your question, darling. What are you going to say? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks. So I've got Jennifer S. Do they have any natural predators?
Sharks, in general, yeah. So yeah, sharks do have natural predators. So quite often it's other shark species. And also sort of recently, so South Africa is known as a great white hotspot. But just recently, orca have been basically going in and preying on great whites there. And they've been targeting their livers. So their shark livers are really rich in oil. And they've kind of scared all the great whites away from that area. So yeah, they have predators of other sharks and orca. I'm sure there's others as well.
Thank you. So we've got just under 2 minutes left. Jen and Morgan, I can see you've got your hands raised. We've got some typed questions. So from a Lucy Harding, who I believe you may know. So Lucy's going to be giving a talk for us in 2 weeks' time on her research. So Haley says, awesome talk, thanks. How do you attach these tags to basking sharks?
So yeah, it's another good question. So the tags are put onto the sharks, and we use what's called a titanium dart, which is a little metal thing that's about that big, and then that's attached to a tether, which is then attached to the tag. And basically that goes in the shark a bit like a piercing, so it goes in on their back, sort of near their dorsal fin, so the muscle around that area is really thick. So when we were tagging sharks in the Isle of Man, some sharks didn't even notice, so they didn't notice the boat behind them or that piercing that's going in their back, and that's how we tagged them. But there are other methods that you can use for tagging, but that was how we tagged the basking sharks.
Thank you. Just in case it does cut out, we've got less than a minute, so just in case it does, thank you very much, Haley, and thank you everybody for attending. Okay, so unfortunately we did run out of time during the meeting for all the questions that everybody had, but Haley's very kind and has agreed to answer our questions now. So Haley, one of the questions was, do sharks have any natural predators? And Jen has specified, do basking sharks have any natural predators?
Okay, yeah. So it's a good question. So they're big sharks, so why wouldn't anything want to eat it? As in, it's got a lot of oil in that liver. So I don't think there's been any documented cases of something actually preying on a basking shark. But I know that there were photos taken a couple of years ago of a grey seal eating a pup. So I don't know whether that seal had hunted the pup or whether it had scavenged it. But as with the other species of sharks, if there's going to be one predator that's going to take them down, it will be orca. And that's simply because of the way that they can hunt cooperatively within their groups.
Ooh, awesome, thank you. A question from Morgan. I just wanted to ask a question about your tagging data. Oh, I thought this one as well. So on your map, there was a basking shark that went from the Bay of Biscay to Norway. What would have been its likely route past the UK?
Well, that's something I'd love to know as well. So just because of the nature of that tag, so it has to be at the surface in order to tell us where it is. We actually don't know the route that shark has taken. So it could have done loads of things, like it could have gone off to Canada, could have come back, it could have gone round Ireland and back down through past the Isle of Man again and then back up to Norway, or it could have just pigeoned straight to Norway. But we just don't know, which is one of the drawbacks of those types of tag.
And do you remember, I know because obviously you don't have the data right in front of you, do you remember how long it took between when it popped up in the Bay of Biscay to when it popped up in Norway?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can't remember off the top of my head now. Papers take a very long time to get into publication, so it's been a long time since I've had a good look at the data.
That's fair enough. I just thought I'd ask on the off chance. So Hattie asked, how long did it take the whale shark to migrate from the Philippines to from the Galapagos?
Cool. Yeah. So again, that's another good question, and it shows that you know all the listeners out there are really thinking about what I'm saying, which is good. So that whale shark took, I think it was about 2 years to make that migration. So again, if you look at that in context, some of the other sharks are probably moving around a little bit more within a shorter amount of time. But the paper's out there and freely available if you want to have a read and get some more information on it. So I can send you the link if you want, and you can put it somewhere that people can get it.
Yeah, I'll put it in the links in the YouTube and the Facebook comments. And then we had one from Ellie who asked, why is the basking shark called basking?
Yeah, so the basking shark is called by lots of different names, and they all have like different roots in terms of where they've gotten the name. So we think they're called basking sharks because of their habit of feeding along the surface. So people used to think that they were like basking in the sun at the surface, sort of enjoying the warmer temperatures. My personal favourite is the basking sharks are called hoe mothers. So I think that's a great name. And we think that that's kind of derived from, or if you look at what home mother would have meant, sort of where it's come from, which I think was Scotland, I think it means like mothers of dogfish. So that's where that name came from.
Sorry, hoe mothers.
Hoe mothers, yeah. I think it's a great name.
Hoe mothers. And my personal favourite, how can you say basking shark in Manx language, please, in Manx Gaelic from the Isle of Man?
You know I can't, but I can butcher it for you. God beg for you.
Okay, that's not how you pronounce it. That's fine. It's a good effort.
At least I'm trying.
So then we had Carol who asked, have you noticed a decrease of basking shark populations in your study areas due to climate change? And Morgan also asked that she'd be interested to know where the basking sharks are now, whether the basking sharks are now going with the warmer waters.
Okay, so those are two very good questions. And again, equally, I could spend a very long time answering them, but I'll try and keep it to a minimum. So in Isle of Man waters, there's definitely been a decline in the sightings of basking sharks, for sure. And we've noticed that along the Cornish coast as well. Oh, how to unpack it. But so I think the first thing to really kind of point out is that we don't know that the sharks aren't still there. So they might just be below the surface feeding. We also don't know the thermal tolerance of basking sharks. So we don't know whether warming seas will actually affect where they're found. But something that might be having an effect is that their favourite food is called copepods, and those are moving further north. So we think this might be why we're still seeing them in greater numbers up in Scotland in the Inner Hebrides. So yeah, there's a whole host of factors that might be affecting where basking sharks are, where they might not be. Because one big issue it also is disturbance, and perhaps basking sharks are learning where they're being disturbed as well. So that, yeah, there's a whole host of things at play, but we definitely need to find out more about basking shark thermal tolerances in order to answer that question a bit more effectively.
Can I just ask a follow-up? How do you know where the copepods are?
So I'm just trying to remember. It was actually from a talk that I attended at the Southwest Marine Network.
Yes, really
I can never remember what it's called. Yeah. So some researchers have done some work following copepods there. is how they have been tracked in the past. I can't remember if this was the case from that talk, but they track plankton zooms. That's what we're on. Plankton blooms, which is what zooplankton will feed on. So that's how they've tracked that.
Cool. And next one was from Iona, and Iona would like to know what the smallest shark is.
Cool. So the smallest shark is called the dwarf lantern shark. So it's about 20 centimeters long, which is probably about that, so can fit in your hand. It's a deep sea shark. We still don't know that much about it, but what we do know is that it glows in the dark, which is super cool.
Is this one discovered fairly recently, or was there a new species of it discovered fairly recently?
Yeah, I think you might be right. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I remember,
yeah,
quite recently as well.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
And then the final question, I think, is from Alistair, age 7, and he would like to know if megalodons could still exist.
There's always a megalodon question. So again, it's a great question. So megalodons are unfortunately not around anymore. I personally think it would be super cool if they were, but yeah, they aren't around. And a lot of people who think that they are still around think that they live deep in the ocean, and that's why we haven't seen them. But I think researchers believe that megalodons needed to stay within warmer waters. So even if they were hiding from us at depth, they wouldn't be doing very well because the temperature down there is too cold for them. So unfortunately, no megalodons. But if you're in the UK, and when we're all allowed out again, there are beaches along the UK where you can go and find megalodon teeth, which is super cool.
So where should we go hunting for megalodon teeth?
So you can find megalodon teeth at a place called Walton on the Naze. So I've found loads of fossilised sand tiger sharks when I've gone there. The megalodon tooth still eludes me. One day I'll get it. But
one day. I've seen one at Colin Speedy has one. So
of course.
Of course he does. So he's doing our next talk on Monday the 13th. So thank you so much, Haley, for being our first expert for our Meet the Expert Mondays for Shark Month.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for sharing your sharky knowledge. So we've got Colin Speedy coming up on the 13th of April talking about Britain's sea monster, the basking shark. And then Haley's PhD, fellow PhD student, Lucy Harding, talking about, I think the title is Think All Sharks Are Cold-Blooded? Well, think again. And then on the 27th, we have Charles Hood talking about Cornish blue sharks. And so, yeah, thank you so much, Haley. And thank you to everybody for watching. And yeah, keep an eye out for more stuff coming up.